Okay, picking up right where we left off, we just need to modify something we did in the last video. So the last video, we reduced the size of the scope by changing the size of the underlying image. And I said that there was two ways of changing the size of an object. That's one way. The other way is you can scale the object itself. And that's what I did in between videos. I dropped this down to 0.4x and 0.4y. The reason for it is because ultimately we need to have this, when we hit the space bar, we're having this come way out in front of the camera. We really need it to be much closer to the camera. I did some testing, and that was the conclusion I came up with, and I'll demonstrate in a couple minutes why. So suffice to say, to move the scope closer, you need to shrink the size or else it would be too big. So you're shrinking the size to accommodate the fact that we've moved the scope closer. So just keep that in mind, that that's the true goal. We need to move the scope closer to the camera, and so therefore the size had to be shrunk. That way you would still actually see the scope. You would still see the scope when it gets moved and you hit the space bar. Now, as far as the actual movement, that's in our script, the scope object.get component. As you can see, this was changed. I changed the y to 1.05 f, since it's a decimal, and I changed this to -6. Depending on exactly where you place things, you might have to make it slightly different, but the bottom line is I raised it up a little bit, and I moved it much closer. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can continue. So what we're going to do in this one is we're going to use the horizontal movement of the mouse and the vertical movement of the mouse to aim the target. So aiming the target in a first-person shooter is really rotating the camera. So that means we need to rotate the camera, but that means we also want the scope to rotate with the camera. We don't want to look away from the scope. We want the scope to stay centered. So that means if we're rotating the camera, we need to rotate the scope. Well, the easiest thing to do is to take the scope and drag and drop it onto the camera. Why? Because that makes the scope a child. So if we do something to the main camera, it will now do it to the scope. So if we rotate the camera, the scope will also be rotated. Okay, so now it's just a matter of rotating the scope. So we'll go into our script and we're going to do two things. We're going to grab two variables. So public, and it's going to be a float since we're using decimals, public float, and it is going to be, we'll call this X ROT ADJ. So X rotation adjustment, public float Y ROT ADJ. So Y rotation adjustment. Now, with each and every frame, we want to have any change to the mouse be dropped into those variables, because Unity is really looking at it's not looking at just the mouse as a whole. It's looking at a horizontal axis and it's looking at a vertical axis. So that's why we have to have two separate variables. So X ROT ADJ is equal to input, because we're looking for player input, dot get axis. Which axis? Well, it's the mouse axis, but you would think it would be X. It's not. It's actually Y, and we'll explain why in a minute. So Y ROT ADJ equals input dot get axis mouse X. And then the last thing we need to do, and yes, I did say last already because it's actually quite simple. Now we just do transform dot rotate, and it's going to be X ROT adjustment. Let's see, and we're going to multiply that by -1 or else it's inverted. And then Y ROT adjustment, comma 0. So the Z is not going to rotate at all. So transform.rotate, what this does, it says whatever position you're currently in, rotate X, Y, and Z by a certain amount. This is not to be confused with Euler angles, where it also has an X, Y, and Z rotation. That is an absolute rotation and ignores the current position. So we're not using Yule angle. This is a cumulative rotation. So let's save this, and if I didn't make any mistakes, this should work already. So I'm going to hit the space bar. I'm going to move up, it moves up, I move down, move left, move right. You now have aiming down sights. That easy. Now the only thing that we don't have with this is if it's a sniper, you may have multiple level zooms. So maybe you would also want to zoom based on the scroll wheel. I might do a separate video for that. Or if you want, I already have from a week or so ago or 2 weeks ago, there's one that very explicitly talks about zooming the camera based on the scroll wheel. Maybe I'll put a link in the description. But that should about do it. So just a little more explanation. Like I said, this probably looks counterintuitive. It's like, why is Y being dropped into X and X being dropped into Y? It's not a great explanation, but when you think about it, okay, if you are rotating, so if you're standing, okay, and you look left and you look right, think about what you're pivoting on. You're pivoting on a vertical position, like a maypole. You're looking left and you're looking right, so you're on a vertical pivot. Likewise, if you're looking up and you're looking down, you would be on a horizontal pivot, okay? I can't think of a good comparison for that, like maybe a park bench and you kind of like lean back and you lean forward. You're on a horizontal pivot. Now, if you really want to see for yourself, what you can do is you can quote unquote fix this. You can make X rot adjustment be mouse X, make Y rot adjustment mouse Y, and then you'll see, okay, I get it, they're switched. And the other thing, as far as the -1, that has to do with which direction the unity is configured to be. Like I said, when you move one direction, it's a negative. When you move the other direction, it's a positive. So if you don't do this, the -1, what happens is this becomes inverted. Moving right on the mouse would actually rotate you left. Moving left on the mouse would actually rotate you right. So that should do it. So really simple, really easy. It's that easy to grab input from the mouse and translate that into a rotation. So any questions, just let me know.